I still remember the morning I sipped my coffee on the deck, admiring my brand new privacy wall, while Karen Henderson screamed herself hoarse on the other side. The 1200 tall structure of treated cedar and reinforced concrete stood like a monument to justice, completely obliterating her million-dollar lake view. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how Pine Ridge's most notorious HOA president learned that karma comes in the form of perfectly legal construction projects. When I bought my modest 3-bedroom ranch house on Lakeside Drive, I thought I'd found paradise. The property backed directly onto Crystal Lake with a private dock and beach access that the previous owners had maintained for 30 years. My neighbors seemed friendly enough during the walkthrough, waving from their manicured lawns. I should have paid more attention to the woman across the cul-de-sac who watched my every move through her curtains. Karen Henderson lived in what could only be described as a McMansion, a gaudy 500 cubic feet monstrosity that dominated the street. Her property sat higher on the hill, giving her house a commanding view of the lake over my roofline. What she didn't have was direct water access. The developer had positioned her lot just far enough back that she'd need to walk through either my property or use the public beach a half-mile away. The first few months passed peacefully. I spent weekends kayaking, hosting small barbecues, and generally enjoying the tranquil life I'd worked 20 years in corporate accounting to afford. Then came the knock on my door one Saturday morning. Karen stood there in designer athleisure, clipboard in hand, fake smile plastered across her Botoxed face. She introduced herself as the HOA president and launched into a speech about maintaining property values and community standards. Apparently, my kayak rack was 2 and too close to the property line. My deck furniture wasn't from the approved vendor list, and the native wildflowers I planted were considered weeds under subsection 12. 4 of the landscaping guidelines. I nodded politely, made the requested adjustments, and figured that would be the end of it. How naive I was. Over the next few weeks, I noticed strangers wandering through my backyard, taking photos of the lake, and even using my dock. When I confronted one couple, they apologized and said they were guests at the Henderson Lakeside retreat. They showed me the listing on their phone. My blood ran cold as I scrolled through the rental advertisement. Karen had listed her house as having exclusive lake access and private beach privileges. The photo showed my dock, my beach, even my kayak in the background. She was charging $300 a night based on amenities that belonged to me. I immediately went to confront her, finding her power washing her driveway in the midday heat. When I explained the situation, she didn't even have the decency to look embarrassed. Instead, she tilted her head and spoke in a condescending tone that made my teeth grind. She claimed the Lakeview was a shared neighborhood asset that benefited everyone's property values. According to her interpretation of the HOA rules, I had no right to interfere with the community's enjoyment of natural features. If I tried to block access or complained about her guests, she'd fine me for violating the Neighborhood Harmony Clause. Then she smiled and suggested I should be grateful that her rentals brought such high-quality visitors to our little community. I spent that night poring over the HOA bylaws, searching for any ammunition. What I found was even better than expected. While Karen had twisted the rules to suit her purposes, she'd overlooked several key provisions. Property owners had the right to install privacy structures, fences, and landscaping features as long as they met specific height and material requirements. The documents even included a grandfather clause protecting existing property rights, established before the HOA formation. The next morning, I called my lawyer friend Derek, who specialized in property law. After reviewing everything, he laughed and said Karen had handed me a gift. Not only was she criminally trespassing by directing people onto my property, but she was also committing fraud by advertising amenities she didn't own. However, he suggested a more poetic solution than legal action. I spent the next 2 weeks planning my revenge with the precision of a military operation. I hired a surveyor to mark my exact property lines, obtained all necessary permits from the city, and found a construction crew that could work fast. I even had an architect design the structure to maximize both privacy and view blockage while staying within every single HOA guideline. The wall would be 12 feet tall, the maximum allowed height. It would run along my entire property line facing Karen's house made of approved materials in an approved color. Most importantly, it would be positioned to completely block her view. of the lake while preserving mine. The crew promised they could complete the job in a single weekend if I paid rush fees. Money well spent, I decided. I scheduled the construction for Memorial Day weekend when I knew Karen would be hosting her annual HOA board barbecue. The trucks arrived at 7 o'clock a.m. sharp on Saturday. By noon, the posts were set in concrete. By evening, the frame was complete. Sunday morning, the cedar panels went up. Sunday afternoon, the finishing touches were applied. The wall was a masterpiece of malicious compliance. It followed every rule to the letter while achieving maximum impact. From my deck, I still had a perfect view of the lake. From Karen's property, she now had an exclusive view of 12 feet of natural cedar boarding. I was enjoying a beer on my deck when I heard the first shriek. Karen came charging across the street, her party guests trailing behind her. Her face had turned an alarming shade of purple as she screamed about property values and community destruction. She threatened to sue to have me arrested to mobilize the entire HOA against me. I calmly handed her a folder containing copies of all my permits, the surveyor's report, and highlighted sections of the HOA bylaws. I also included screenshots of her rental listings featuring my property and a cease and desist letter from Derek's law firm. As she flipped through the pages, her expression shifted from rage to panic. Her guests began murmuring among themselves. Several pulled out their phones, likely checking if their own properties were being misrepresented in her rental schemes. One board member mentioned that falsely advertising amenities could result in serious legal consequences. Another wondered aloud if the HOA insurance covered fraud committed by board members. Karen tried to rally them, insisting I was destroying the neighborhood's character, but the seed of doubt had been planted. When she demanded an emergency board meeting to force me to remove the wall, the other members hesitated. They agreed to meet but made no promises about the outcome. The meeting was held the following Tuesday at the community center. I arrived, prepared with a presentation detailing Karen's unauthorized use of my property, complete with testimonials from confused renters and time-stamped security footage of trespassers. I explained how I tried to resolve the issue privately, but was threatened with fines for protecting my own property rights. The room was packed with neighbors who'd heard about the drama. As I spoke, heads nodded in recognition. Apparently, Karen had pulled similar stunts with other lakefront properties, just not as brazenly. One elderly couple mentioned finding strangers in their garden who claimed Karen had told them it was a community space. When Karen took the podium, her usual confidence had evaporated. She stammered through a defense about maximizing property values and promoting the neighborhood. But when pressed about the rental income she'd earned using false advertising, she refused to answer. The board treasurer asked to see financial records related to her rental business, wondering if she'd properly reported the income and paid taxes. The vote was unanimous. Karen was removed from her position as HOA president, effective immediately. The board also voted to support my right to maintain the privacy wall and issued a formal statement that property owners could not advertise or provide access to amenities they didn't own. But the consequences didn't stop there. Word of the scandal spread through the real estate community. Karen's rental listing was removed from all major platforms for violating terms of service. Previous guests demanded refunds for being misled about amenities. The state's Attorney General office opened an investigation into potential fraud charges. 3 months later, I was spreading mulch in my garden when a process server knocked on my door. He wasn't looking for me though. He needed directions to Karen's house to deliver a summon. She was being sued by multiple guests and faced criminal charges for fraud with potential fines exceeding $200,000. The last time I saw Karen, she was loading boxes into a moving truck, her McMansion sporting a foreclosure notice. As the truck pulled away, she glared at my wall with pure hatred. I raised my coffee mug in a silent toast. She flipped me off and drove away, leaving Pine Ridge forever. The wall still stands today, a monument to what happens when an HOA Karen mistakes someone else's property for her personal profit.